It's September 27th, 2016. Too long didn't read version is this. After crunching the numbers, evaluating what I really care about, and deciding, I'll make a lot of decisions and a lot of hard decisions at that. I'm not going to be doing the transplant this time. If I relapse down the road, I will do it then, will happily and willingly, probably hoping for it the whole time. But as of right now, I just don't think I can justify doing it. So now I'll get to where that comes from. And by the way, that's with full doctor support on both medical staff. They don't think I'm particularly crazy. They don't think I'm at significantly higher risk. They think that they do think that transplant is the best shot at long-term survival, but the window is smaller than you'd think from those initial numbers. And those initial numbers are right, but I'll break it all down. Anyway, when you get to SCCA, a couple of things happen after you come from your regular hospital. I hope you never experienced this, but when you get to a transplant center, you start immediately getting shuffled around and tests done on you. People are busy, they're trying to get you ready, and they don't have a lot of time to sit with you and kind of guide you. So the relationship you had with your previous doctor, it's gone. You don't have it anymore. You also start to notice that there are two types of people at SCCA. There are parents with children, and those parents are desperately trying to keep their children alive at all costs. And there are older couples with one partner desperately trying to keep their partner alive at all costs. And there's not a lot of middle ground. There's not a lot of people in the middle where they're their own agent, can protect their own interests. It's typically that scenario. And so I think there are a lot of people there that don't ask questions, that don't ask hard questions, and don't ask a lot of stuff. You take the survival numbers and you go. And so I started asking some very real, serious questions. I had been hearing more and more off the cuff mentions of side effects, off the cuff mentions of graft versus host consequences. And so I started asking for hard numbers. And I finally got the doctor to admit a couple of things, 60% of people get some graft versus host. Now that's a spectrum. 1 in 10 total, 1 in 10 out of everybody we give the transplant to, we wish we wouldn't have done it. It's pretty low. It's only 1 in 10. That there's another 1 or 2 out of 10 that it's pretty severe, that they definitely would still do the transplant, but it's a pretty severe graft versus host, so a major quality of life impact. There's 10 to 15% of everyone who does a stem cell transplant will get another malignancy in the next 10 years or so because of all the radiation. So there's a lot of major factors. I tried to only factor in that 1 in 10 who would not do the transplant, who the doctor would choose not to do the transplant because it was the graft versus host was so bad, because the other ones were all such wild cards, and that was a pretty concrete answer, so I only included that. And so once I started asking those questions, I had some numbers to play with. And we know those initial numbers, 60-ish% and 15-ish% survival rates. 15 is with not doing a transplant, and 60 is with. Now, long-term survival rates. Now, that 60% of course gets dropped down to 50, because for me, I consider wishing I was dead worse than being dead. I don't know about you. That's a question I hope most of you never have to evaluate, but I have, and that's where I sit. So that's at least that portion. So that drops it down to at least 50, and I think if I'm honest, it's probably a lot higher than that. And then there's that, you go to the other side with 15%. So 15 versus 50 is still pretty significant odds. Except that 15%, if you relapse, you get a second shot. Now, it's a little harder traditionally to get people into a second remission. And that puts it at risk, and your odds are a little lower at a transplant during second remission. But those have been changing a little. And anyway, even with sticking strictly with old data, because that's really what I based all my stuff on, you end up, when you combine the totals, and I got these numbers confirmed by my doctors, it's somewhere in the 45-ish% range versus the 50 to 60% range. Again, that 60 drops down to 50, and so it's really about 44% to 50%. That's the overall statistics when you factor in a second transplant. Now, a lot of people get disqualified at the second point because they're older and they've aged out. They're not healthy enough. They have major health problems. Those are all certainly risks. I could relapse and they wouldn't be able to get me into a second remission. That is certainly a risk. It is not unheard of. One of my doctors at Swedish literally told me that they've experienced that recently. They also told me that they've had people that effortlessly went into a second remission and are waiting on a transplant. I just, after speaking with the doctors, running all this by them, they've kind of all told me that it's just not as cut and dry as you think. And when you start, and depending on what you value, it may not be the right decision. And for me, I don't think it is. It's not that I won't do one. If I do relapse, I will probably be hoping that they can get me into remission and hoping that they can get me into a stem cell transplant. But right now, I feel like there's almost a 1 in 5 chance, the 1 in 7 chance at least, that I'm fine. And that couple percent difference in survival rate to me is not worth it. Is not worth the risk that I am potentially healthy already, that I will never relapse. Now I might, and I'm basically going to operate as if I am. I'm going to have to live every day wondering if today's the day it comes back, and try and make every day count and have as much damn fun as possible. I was pretty good at that before, but so that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm not going to do the transplant. We have come up with a plan between the two teams. I'm going to go immediately back into chemo. We're going to finish my next 4 chemo cycles and get all the total 8 in, and monitor me indefinitely. And I will be going that route. So hoping for the best. And the other part of this that kind of, I don't want to say tipped me over the edge, but that couple percent window still did slightly err on the side of transplant. And it was still sitting there. And I end of last week, I got to a point where I was like, I was ready to just walk out strictly based on those numbers. I was unhappy, wasn't getting the info I needed. And to be frank, I was right where I am now. I just didn't believe that it was worth the gap, and worth the tiny gap versus the amount of turmoil. And so I talked to finally got my doctor cornered, told him I was going to leave if I didn't get more info. And he said, I will try my best to get you more info. And he went on a quest to find info that would convince me that it was the best decision. Well, he kind of came back with a slightly different perspective. It's not that he is completely convinced, because he would still tell me, and he did tell me, that the best chance of survival still is a stem cell transplant. But he had slightly different stats after finding a few studies and calling the head researchers at those studies, finding out info about that they had. And my doctor at Swedish also did the same. And it's just a lot more, not as cut and dry as it used to be. The new meds have changed it. The meds that I'm on, I've been on them the whole time, have drastically changed survival rates. And it's looking like no matter what decision I make, I've got better odds than we thought in the past. I'll break down all of that later, but I wanted to at least get this all out there and kind of explain where I had been. Let people know that the decision was not made willy-nilly. Yes, I just said willy-nilly. And in a life or death situation too. It seems like a perfect time to use willy-nilly. Anyway, so I just want people to know the situation, know that I had changed my mind, know that it wasn't really changed idly, it was changed based on data and a couple of values, and go from there. And I'll update you all, answer as many questions as you need.